She came to the west gate at 20 minutes past 9, on the coldest morning of that whole gray spring, and she carried a small wooden box against her chest the way a woman carries something she has already decided to lose. I saw her before she reached the railings. I see everyone before they reach the railings. That is my work. For 31 years I have kept the gate book of Aldermere Palace, sitting at the warden's window just inside the arch, logging every arrival to the forecourt, the deliveries, the dignitaries, the staff, the tour parties that gather on the cobbles to watch the guard. Faces come and go like weather, but some faces stop the pen in your hand. Hers did. She was very old. 80, I would have guessed, perhaps more, her back curved like a question that life had stopped expecting an answer to. Her coat was good wool, brushed and pressed, the kind a person keeps for one occasion a year. Her shoes had been polished that morning. I could see the shine even from the window, and that small detail told me more than anything she would say. People do not polish their shoes for an errand. They polish them for a duty. She stopped at the painted line where the public is asked to keep back, 3 paces from the sentry box, and she looked up at the guard the way you look up at a cathedral. Then she stood there. She did not raise a phone. She did not call out. She simply stood, holding her box in the cold. The guard on the post that morning was Corporal Hale. I should tell you about Hale, because the whole of what happened turns on the kind of man he was, and a man like that is not made in a morning. He had stood the west gate for the better part of 2 years, and in all that time I had seen him move only as the drill demanded, the slow stamp of the changing of the watch, the present arms for the captain's inspection, nothing more. Tourists shouted at him to smile. Children waved. Once a man in an expensive coat snapped his fingers an inch from Hale's nose to see if he would blink. Hale did not blink. He had a face built for stillness, long and grave under the great black weight of the bearskin, and eyes that looked at a fixed point above every head and seemed to be reading something written there that the rest of us could not see. That is the thing people never understand about the men at the gate. They think the stillness is emptiness. They think a man who does not move is a man with nothing moving inside him. I have sat at that window for 31 years, and I will tell you the opposite is true. The stillness is a discipline laid over a fire. The harder the post, the bigger the fire it is built to hold. The old woman stood, and Hale stood, and between them the cold morning held its breath. I went back to the gate book. Arrivals do not log themselves. A florist's van came and was waved through. A clerk from the records office crossed the forecourt with a folder under his arm and nodded to me through the glass. And every time I glanced up, she was still there, 3 paces from the sentry box, that wooden box held against her chest, looking up at a man who by every rule of his service was not permitted to look back. By 9:30 I could not bear it any longer. I am not a soft man. 31 years at a palace gate cures you of softness. You learn that most of what arrives at a great house arrives wanting something, and that your job is to be the polite stone wall between the wanting and the walls. But there is a kind of stillness that is not asking for anything, and hers was that kind, and it troubled me more than any shouting ever had. I put down the pen and went out through the side door into the cold. "Madam," I said, coming up beside her, careful to keep my voice low so as not to startle, "are you well? Can I help you with anything?" She turned to me slowly, and I saw that she had been crying, though she had done it without sound and almost without trace, the way the very old cry, as if even grief must be rationed now. She had a face that had once been handsome and was now simply kind, all the sharpness worn off it by years. "Thank you," she said. "No, I only wanted to stand here a little while. I'll not be a trouble." "You're no trouble at all." I glanced at the box. It was old oak, the corners rounded with handling, a brass clasp gone soft and golden with age. "Have you come a long way?" "From the coast," she said. "I came on the early train." She said it simply, but I did the arithmetic and it sat in my chest like a stone. A woman of her age, alone, 3 hours on a cold train before the sun was properly up, to stand on cobbles in front of a gate. "And what's brought you to us?" She looked back up at Hale then, and something in her face settled, the way a face settles when it has found the thing it traveled for. "It would have been our anniversary today," she said. 59 years. I always wanted to bring him here. He served, you see, a long time ago when he was young, before I knew him, before any of it. He stood a post like that one." She nodded toward the sentry box, toward Hale, motionless under his bearskin. "Not here, somewhere else, somewhere that doesn't exist anymore. But a post like that. He used to say a man learns who he is by what he can stand still through." I said nothing. There is a time for the warden of the gate to talk and a time for him to be the stone wall, and I knew which this was. "He passed in the winter," she went on very quietly. "In January it was peaceful. I was holding his hand." She drew a breath. "And I found after that I had never once seen him in his proper place. We met when all that was behind him. I never saw the young man at the post. I only ever had the old one in the garden." She almost smiled. "So I thought, on our anniversary, I would bring him to a gate and let him stand at one again, even if it's only me doing the standing now." And she opened the brass clasp of the old oak box and tilted it gently toward me so that I could see. Inside, on a bed of faded blue felt worn smooth in the shape of long keeping, lay his medals. There were 5 of them, ribbons gone soft as moth wing, the metal dark with age and care, laid out in a row by a hand that had clearly arranged and rearranged them 100 times until each sat exactly where it belonged. They were not grand. They were not the kind of decorations that draw a crowd. They were the quiet medals of a man who had done hard things in hard places and then come home and said nothing about it for 60 years. "These are his," she said. "I've carried them since January. I didn't know what to do with them. They asked at the home whether I'd like to give them to a museum, and perhaps one day I will. But not yet. Not today." She closed the box gently, as if she were drawing a blanket over a sleeping man. "Today I just wanted to bring them somewhere they'd be understood." I have thought a great deal in the time since about that word understood. She had not said admired, or honored, or remembered. She had said understood, and I have come to believe she chose it carefully, the way the old choose the few words they have strength left to spend. A museum would admire the medals. The neighbors who came after the funeral had remembered the kind old man in the garden. But none of them had understood the thing she had spent 5 months alone with, that the medals were not the point, that the medal and the ribbon were only the receipt for something far harder, 60 years of a man who had learned, at a post, who he was, and had carried it quietly ever after without once asking to be thanked. She had not come to a gate for the gate. She had come because a gate is one of the last places left in the world where a man is asked to stand still and hold a hard thing inside himself for hours, asking nothing, and she wanted her husband brought, just once, to a place that did with stone and discipline what he had done with his whole life. She wanted him taken home, in a sense, to the only country that had ever truly been his. I did not understand all of that standing in the cold beside her, but I understood enough to know I was in the presence of something I had no right to hurry. Behind us I heard the smallest sound, the faintest creak of leather and wool. I did not think anything of it then. The wind, I told myself, the cold settling into the old stones of the arch. But it was not the wind. It was Corporal Hale on his post, 3 paces away, beginning, very slowly, against every order he had ever been given, to listen. I should explain what listening costs a man on that post, because if you do not understand the cost, you will not understand what he did later. The guard at the west gate is not allowed to acknowledge the public. That is not cruelty. It is the spine of the whole thing. A sentry who answers one person must answer the next, and within an hour the gate is a circus, and the discipline that makes the gate mean anything has bled out into the cobbles. So the rule is absolute. He does not speak. He does not turn his head. He does not meet an eye or take a hand or accept a gift across the line. If a member of the public needs help, the public goes to the warden, to me, at the window, and the sentry stands his post as though the world beyond his fixed point did not exist. I have explained that rule to 10,000 visitors. I believe in it. A great house runs on 1,000 such rules, and the man who keeps them is worth more than the man who only admires them. So when I say that Hale began to listen, understand that he was doing a forbidden thing in the only way left to a man who cannot move, with the only part of him the drill could not nail down. His eyes stayed on their fixed point above our heads. His boots did not stir. But I had watched that man for 2 years, and I saw the change in him the way you see the tide turn. Nothing you could name, everything different. The set of his jaw, a stillness inside the stillness. He had heard the words 59 years, and I was holding his hand, and a post like that one. And somewhere behind the grave young face a door had come open that the service had spent 2 years teaching him to keep shut. The old woman did not notice. She had eyes only for the box. "I'll go now," she said to me. "I've done what I came to do. I only wanted him to stand at a gate again." She tucked the box back against her chest and looked up one last time at the motionless figure under the bearskin, and her voice when it came was not bitter, only tired in a way that went down to the bone. "I know he can't see me. I know it's not allowed. I'm not asking him for anything. A man on duty has his duty." She nodded as though agreeing with someone. "My husband would have said the same. He'd have stood just like that, and he'd have been right too. And that, I think, is the part that undid us all in the end. Not that she asked, but that she didn't. She had traveled 3 hours in the dark with the last of her strength, carrying the proof of a good man's whole life, and she had decided before she ever left the coast that she would ask for nothing, because she understood the rule better than the people who only enforce it. She had come to give, not to take. She wanted only to stand near a thing that would understand. I have turned a great many people away from that gate. The angry ones are easy. It is the ones who ask for nothing that break your heart. I was about to walk her gently back toward the cobbles when the morning got more complicated, the way mornings at a great house do. A voice came sharp across the forecourt. "Warden, is there a problem at the line?" It was Mr. Crail, the duty supervisor of the forecourt that week. A thin, exact man with a clipboard and a horror of anything that might gather a crowd. He was not a bad man. I want to be fair to him, because it would be easy to make him the villain, and he was not. He was simply a man who had been given a small piece of a great machine to keep running smoothly, and who had decided long ago that the way to keep it running was to let nothing unusual ever happen on his watch. He came toward us with quick, clipped steps, his eyes already moving between the old woman, the box, and the knot of tourists who had begun, as tourists do, to sense that something was happening and to drift closer with their phones half raised. "No problem, Mr. Crail," I said. "The lady was just leaving." But his eyes had found the box. "What is that?" "Madam, I'll have to ask what you're carrying." "They're my husband's medals," she said, and there was no fear in her, only that same worn patience. "I'm not bringing them in. I only came to stand a moment." "I'm afraid we can't have people stopping at the line," Crail said, not unkindly but in the flat official voice that is somehow worse than unkindness, the voice of a rule with the man drained out of it. "It draws a crowd, you see. We've a schedule. The changing of the watch is at 10, and we'll have 200 visitors on these cobbles. I'll have to ask you to move along to the public area. There's a lovely view from the rail." She nodded. She had been nodding all morning, agreeing with everyone, taking up no more space in the world than she had to. "Of course," she said. "I understand." And she turned to go. I do not know exactly what it was, whether it was the way she turned, that slow, careful pivot of the very old, or the way she pressed the box a little harder against her coat, as if to apologize to it for the trouble, or simply that I had 31 years of watching people arrive wanting something, and here at last was one who wanted nothing at all. But I felt a thing rise in my chest that the warden of a gate is not supposed to feel. "Mr. Crail," I said, "a word." He stepped aside with me, impatient, glancing at his watch. "Warden, I really haven't the time." We opened the forecourt in. Her husband stood a post, I said quietly. A real one, he served. He died this winter. Today would have been 59 years married. She came 3 hours on the early train alone to stand near a gate because she never once saw him at his. She isn't asking to come in. She isn't asking for anything. I let that sit a moment. She'll be gone in 5 minutes if we let her have them. Or we can move her along on a schedule, in front of 200 phones. And that's the picture that leaves this gate today. Creel's jaw worked. He looked at the tourists, multiplying along the rail. He looked at the old woman who had stopped a little way off, uncertain which way the public area lay, turning her box in her hands. And for a moment, I saw the man come back up behind the official, saw him weigh it, the way a decent man weighs a thing when the rule and the right of it have come apart in his hands. But he was a supervisor in his second year, on a forecourt with a schedule, and a man like that reaches for the rule the way a frightened man reaches for a rail. The rule's the rule, Warden, he said, and I heard how much he wanted it to settle the matter for him. If we bend it for one, we bend it for everyone. She has to move along. He raised his voice toward her, gentling it, but it was still the machine talking. Madam, if you'd come this way, please. And it was then, exactly then, that Corporal Hale broke his post. I have to be careful how I tell this because the way I tell it is the way it lives now in everyone who saw it, and I will not cheapen it. He did not run. He did not call out. There was no drama in it of the kind the phones were hoping for. What he did was quieter than that and harder, and it took my breath. He came to attention. Now you will say he was already at attention. He had been at attention for 2 hours. But there is the attention of a man holding a position, and there is the attention of a man who has decided something, and the second is a different creature entirely. I saw his heels come together with a single clean report against the stone, sharper than the drill, the way a man does it when he means it with his whole life. I saw his shoulders square. And then, in the slow, deliberate cadence of the ceremonial that he was about to perform for an audience of one, Corporal Hale turned. He turned a quarter turn, off his fixed point, away from the gate he was sworn to face. A thing I had never seen a sentry do outside of drill in 31 years, until he was facing the old woman across the painted line. The forecourt went still. Even Creel, mid-sentence, stopped with his arm half raised. The old woman did not understand at first. She had turned to go and found, when she looked back, that the statue she had come to stand near was looking at her. Her hand went to her throat. The box trembled. Madam, Creel began again, recovering, the rule reasserting itself in him, I'm sorry, the guard isn't permitted. But the words died, because Hale was no longer a man you interrupted. He had become, in the space of a breath, the most disciplined thing on that whole forecourt, and discipline of that order has a gravity to it. You do not talk over it. You watch. I watched. Hale brought his rifle up, not in threat, never in threat, but in the slow ceremonial carry that the men of that gate perform only for the watch, for the captain, for the rare and solemn occasions when the great house renders honor to something. He brought it across his body in the present, the polished wood and the bright steel catching the gray morning light, every motion exact, every motion costing him, and any soldier on that forecourt. And there was at least one, an old man at the rail in a quiet regimental tie who had stiffened the moment Hale's heels came together, knew what he was watching. That old man, I would learn afterward, had served himself long ago, and had come that morning only to show his grandson the changing of the watch. I watched his hand close hard on the rail. I watched him take off his own cap without seeming to know he had done it, the way an old soldier's body does the right thing a beat before his mind catches up. And I watched him put a hand on his grandson's shoulder and lean down and say something low and urgent into the boy's ear. And the boy, who had been bored and cold and fiddling with his phone, went very still and lowered it, and stood the way his grandfather stood. One old man at a rail, teaching one boy in the space of 10 seconds what 100 school lessons could not, that you are about to see something rare, and you will take your cap off for it, and you will remember it when you are old. He was watching a guardsman render the present arms. It is the salute a sentry gives to those his service holds in the highest honor. It is not given to tourists. It is not given to the curious or the powerful or the loud. In 2 years on that post, Hale had given it perhaps a dozen times, always to the living, always to rank. And now, on the coldest morning of that gray spring, with 200 phones beginning to rise along the rail and a supervisor frozen mid-protest beside me, Corporal Hale rendered the full present arms, slow, perfect, unhurried, to a small oak box of medals in the arms of an 80-year-old widow from the coast. He was saluting her husband. He could not say it. He would never say it. The rule that forbade him to speak had not loosened by one word. But there is a language older than speech that men of the post have always shared, and Hale had found a way to use the only words the drill had left him. He had taken the highest honor his service knew, and he had given it, across the line he was sworn never to cross, to a man he had never met, a man dead these 5 months, who had once stood a post like his somewhere that did not exist anymore, and learned who he was by what he could stand still through. The old woman understood now. I watched it reach her. I watched her face break open, all the worn kindness of it, and the box came up in both her hands and she held it out from her chest, lifting it toward him the way you lift a thing to be blessed, lifting her husband up to be seen, at last, in his proper place, at a gate, by a man who knew exactly what it had cost him to stand one. And she wept, not the rationed, silent weeping of the early morning. She wept the way you weep when something you had given up on has been given back to you whole, openly, helplessly, with her whole worn face, holding the medals high in her trembling hands, while the disciplined young man under the great black bearskin held the present arms and did not waver, and did not look away. I am not ashamed to tell you that the warden of the gate, who has turned 10,000 people away from that line, and prides himself on being made of the same stone as the arch, stood there in the cold with his throat closed and his eyes burning, and could not have logged an arrival to save his life. Beside me, Mr. Crail lowered his arm. He did not stop it. To his lasting credit, and I have come to think more kindly of him than I did that morning, Mr. Crail, the man of the schedule, the man who reached for the rule the way a frightened man reaches for a rail, looked at what was happening across that painted line and understood, as decent men eventually do, that there are moments the rules were built to serve and not to crush, and that this was one of them. He took one slow step back. He folded his hands. And the supervisor of the forecourt, who had been about to move an old woman along on a schedule, stood at a kind of attention of his own and let the moment be. How long Hale held it I could not say. Long enough. Longer than the drill. He held the present arms for that small oak box until the old woman had finished lifting her husband to the light, until her arms grew tired and the box came down again to her chest, and only then, slow, exact, unhurried as everything he did Corporal Hale return the rifle to the order, square his shoulders, and turn the quarter-turn back to his fixed point above the heads of the crowd. He became a statue again. But it was not the same stillness as before, and everyone on that forecourt felt the difference, even the ones with their phones still raised who did not understand what they had filmed. They had come to see a man who would not move. They had seen, instead, the rarest thing a man of the post can show you, the exact moment when a discipline built to hold everything in chooses, for once, to let one thing out, and how much more disciplined the letting out is than the holding in ever was. The old woman stood a moment longer, looking up at him. Then she did something I will carry to my own grave. She came to attention. A widow of 80-some years, curved like a question, in her good wool coat and her shoes polished that morning for a duty. She drew herself up as straight as her old back would let her, there on the cobbles, and she brought the box to her chest, and she returned the honor the only way she had. She did not salute. She did not know the forms. She simply stood as tall and as still as she could, holding her husband against her heart, for as long as her strength would hold her there, answering his stillness with her own, two people who had never met keeping a kind of watch together across a painted line. And the whole forecourt, 200 strangers who had come for spectacle, fell quiet around the two of them and kept the silence with them, because some things even a crowd of strangers knows to honor. That should have been the end of it, a perfect, terrible, beautiful thing, finished. But it was not the end because of who else was watching that morning, and that is the part of the story I almost did not believe myself. There is a window above the west gate. It is set into the old stone of the arch, high up, with leaded glass gone faintly violet with age, and it belongs to a small room that the household calls the watch room, though no one watches from it much anymore. It is where the master of the household keeps his early appointments when he wishes not to be found. I had noticed, when I came out to the old woman, that the casement stood ajar against the cold, and I had thought nothing of it. A draught, I'd told myself. A maid airing the room. It was not a draught. It was the master of the household himself, the most senior officer of the whole great house, a gray, upright man of few words, whom the staff feared the way you fear a thing you respect, and he had been standing at that open window through every moment of it. He had seen the old woman arrive. He had heard, carried up on the cold, still air through the open casement, every word of what she told me, and he had watched Corporal Hale break his post. I learned all this later. At the time I knew only that, perhaps 2 minutes after Hale returned to his fixed point, the small iron door at the base of the arch opened, and the master of the household came down the worn stone stair and out into the forecourt, and the temperature of the morning changed entirely. Mr. Crail went white. I understood why. By the strict letter of it, a sentry had just committed the gravest breach the post allows. He had abandoned his fixed point, turned from the gate, and rendered ceremonial honor without order to a member of the public, in front of 200 witnesses and 100 raised phones. There are services in which a man does not survive a thing like that. And here was the most senior officer of the house, crossing the cobbles toward the sentry box with his face like the gray stone of the arch, and not a soul on that forecourt could read what was coming. I stepped forward. 31 years buys you the right to speak, even out of turn, and I meant to spend all of it. "Sir," I said low, falling in beside him, "if there's to be a reckoning for this, it should fall on me. I'm the one who came out to her. I'm the one who pressed Mr. Crail to let her stay, the corporal." "Warden!" He did not slow his step, and he did not raise his voice, and the single word stopped me cold. "Be quiet a moment." He walked to the painted line. He stopped before the old woman, who looked up at him uncertainly, clutching the box, and I saw her brace herself the way the poor and the old learn to brace when an important man comes toward them, for the polite dismissal, the firm hand, the schedule. She had had a moment of grace, and now her whole bearing said the world would take it back. The master of the household looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the oak box held against her coat. And then this gray, upright, fearsome man, the most senior officer of the great house, did a thing that traveled around the staff in whispers for years afterward, and is, I think, the true heart of everything that happened that day. He removed his hat and he inclined his head to her, a slow, grave bow, the bow a man of the house gives only to honor, and he held it. "Madam," he said, and his voice had gone gentle in a way I had not known it could, "I owe you an apology. You were very nearly turned away from this gate this morning, and that would have been a disgrace to it. I heard what you told the warden. I heard whom you carried." He straightened and looked at the box again. "Your husband stood a post. I have spent my life among men who stand posts, and I will tell you what perhaps no one has told you in these hard months. There is no honor a house like this one keeps that he did not earn 10 times over by the standing of it. The medals are the smallest part. The standing was the thing." The old woman could not speak. She only held the box and looked at him. "My corporal there," he went on, and now he turned slightly so that his words carried to her, to me, to the white-faced Krail, to the 200 along the rail, to hail himself on his post, broke a rule this morning that he has kept faultlessly for 2 years. He left his point. He rendered honor without my order. By the letter of his service, that is a grave thing, and he knew it was a grave thing when he did it, and he did it anyway. A pause, and the gray eyes went hard and bright. I have served 40 years, madam, and I have learned that the finest soldiers are not the ones who never break a rule. They are the ones who know exactly which rule, and exactly when, and are willing to answer for it. He chose the one moment in 2 years that was worth the breaking. He chose well. He let that land on the whole forecourt. There will be no reckoning. There will be the opposite of a reckoning. And he turned to me, and gave the order that I have been proud to carry out every day since. Warden, open the small gate. For a moment I did not move, because I did not believe I had heard him. The small gate, the wicket set into the great iron leaves, is opened for the household, for arriving dignitaries, for the carriages on a state day. It is not opened for the public. It has not been opened for a member of the public in living memory. Sorry. Open it, he said. The lady is not the public this morning. The lady is the wife of a man who stood a post. She will not stand outside the gate her husband's service kept. She will come inside it. Bring her to the forecourt, give her a chair in the warm, and let her sit a while in the place she traveled 3 hours to reach, and send to the kitchen for tea. The smallest softening at the corner of his mouth. The good china. The widow of a guardsman takes her tea on the good china. I opened the small gate. I will not pretend my hands were steady. 31 years I had kept that line, and now I drew back the bolt with the whole forecourt watching, and swung the wicket wide, and I went to the old woman and offered her my arm. Madam, I said, will you come inside? She looked at the open gate. She looked at the arm I offered, and at the box in her own 2 hands, and I saw her understand that she could not take my arm without setting her husband down, and that she would sooner walk on her own than set him down for 1 step of that crossing. So I let my arm fall, and I walked beside her instead, matching her slow, careful pace, and Mrs. Aldous, for that was her name. She gave it to me at last, inside the gate by the brazier, and I have never forgotten it. Mrs. Aldous carried her husband's medals across the painted line, through the small gate of the great house, and onto the forecourt where the guard stands his post. She passed within 3 paces of Corporal Hale as she came through. He was at his fixed point, a statue once more, eyes forward, the bearskin a black weight against the gray sky. But as she drew level with him, and I was close enough to swear to this, his eyes came down from their fixed point for the space of a single heartbeat, down to the small oak box she carried against her heart, and then up again. That was all, a heartbeat. No one with a phone caught it, but she caught it and I caught it, and it was the only thing he ever permitted himself beyond the salute, and it was enough. They brought her a chair, and the good china, and the old man in the regimental tie left his place at the rail and came and sat with her a while, 2 strangers of an age who needed no introduction, and they spoke quietly of posts and of standing them. The crowd along the rail did not disperse for a long time. They had come to watch a man who would not move, and they had been given something they had not known they were hungry for, the sight of a great cold institution remembering, for one morning, what it is actually for. By the time the changing of the watch came at 10, the videos were already racing out into the world. By that night there were millions who had seen the corporal turn and render the present arms to the small oak box, and the old woman lift it to the light, and the gray master of the household bow his head and order the small gate opened. People wrote that it had moved them in a year that had given them little to be moved by. They wrote that they had forgotten honor could look like that, not loud, not armed, not in anyone's face, but quiet and exact, and given freely across a line to someone who had asked for nothing. Mrs. Aldous wrote to us, later that spring, in a careful hand. She thanked the house, and the warden and the master, and she asked us to thank the young man at the gate, whose name she had never been told. She said she had spent 5 hard months feeling that her husband had slipped out of the world unseen. The old man in the garden whom no one would remember had once been the young man at the post. And she said that for the rest of her life, whenever the grief came at her in the small hours, she would have one thing to set against it: that on what would have been their 59th anniversary, she had carried him to a gate, and a disciplined stranger who knew the cost of standing one had looked at what he had been, and judged it worthy, and saluted. She did not, she wrote, expect to come again. She thanked us once more, and signed her husband's name beneath her own. Corporal Hale stood the West Gate for 3 more years before his time was done, and in all those years I never once heard him speak of that morning, and I never once asked him to. That is not the way of men like Hale. The whole of what he was had been in the turn and the salute and that single heartbeat when his eyes came down to the box, and a man who has said a thing that completely has nothing left to add. But I have thought about it every day from my window since. The tourists still shout for him to smile. Children still wave. Now and then a man in an expensive coat still snaps his fingers an inch from a sentry's nose to see if he will blink, and the sentry does not blink, and the man walks off telling his friends the guard is just a statue, a toy soldier, a thing with nothing moving inside it. And I sit at my window with the gate book open, and I let him think it, because I know better. I sat at that line on the coldest morning of a gray spring, and I watched a man who had held everything in for 2 years choose the one moment that was worth letting it out, and I learned the thing the old soldier knew and the old woman knew and her husband knew before either of them was born, that the stillness was never emptiness. It was a fire kept. And the measure of a man at a gate is not whether he can stand without moving. It is what, when it finally matters, he is willing to break his stillness to honor.